I'll begin with you, Vivek. Now, Sakina's Kiss is a very intense novel. It's a journey for readers, and you don't know what's coming next. It's like a puzzle, and you constantly want to put the pieces together to try to understand what's happening. When you're writing your novels, is it the end that you know already, or does it come along the way?
Thank you, Milee. It's when I write, if I already know the end, it feels like I'm only displaying my writing skills. Yeah. And the process of writing is such that you discover as you go along. And that's really the pleasure of writing. As in life, you discover as you go through. And then the challenge and the joy is in dealing with it as it comes. Don't mistake me that I start writing without knowing in which way I'm going. But of course I know. I mean, I know that I'm going north or south. But still, within a work, there are so many dynamics because as the characters develop, which many times, beyond the control of the writer, it is a joy to discover the character, discover the situations, and face those situations and resolve, which is something, and in the process that I many times discover details which I didn't know that existed inside me. So that's how the writing process is, at least for me.
Srinath, you worked very closely with Vivek and you translated the book. You've worked on this journey together for the English edition. What is your process of translation, and particularly with Sakina's Kiss? Do you go about it in a linear fashion, or is it that you translate some sections to get the tone and the style right and then get into a flow?
This is the second, am I audible? Yeah, so this is the second book of Vivek's that I'm translating. With the first one, it was, I hadn't translated anything before that. So with that, I tried translating a few pages over and over until I felt I had, seized the voice of the book. And I then, holding on to it, I could move on. But with the second one, I felt like I was already comfortable with, I think, the way Vivek writes. So I read the book once and I embarked into the translation. And this one, the big difference was I did standing up. So, so I did this one on my feet during the lockdown, which was a somewhat surreal experience because it was almost like these characters were living with me. I was staying mostly by myself in Dharamshala, and that's where the book was translated. So no, nothing special as such, but I did a draft and sent it off to Vivek and our agents, and then we worked on it back and forth for a few more months. So
yeah, one of the things that happened with both the books with Srinath is that we really didn't discuss the sentences or the meanings or words or that kind of a thing, but most of our discussions were about what is beneath the text, general views on literature, about other books, similar books, something, the technique of writing, and many other things. So the discussions, I believe that such conversations, long conversations, help in terms of understanding a writer, because what Srinath really has to do is not translate the sentences, but really take that book across languages, and which is really challenging. And I keep saying this because the book in Kannada is one book, the English it's another book. Because the kind of memories that a Kannada book evokes, it may not be the same in English, because even if you read the same sentence, and I know that every sentence in Kannada exists in English, but still I feel it's a different book.
No, absolutely. The book, of course, is, psychological. It's almost like a thriller. And you convey that not only through the plot and the characters, but also through language and the style of writing. Was it intentional?
I think you used the word thriller. Something similar, say, in every text, every novel or a story, there's always an element of suspense. A suspense could be as you reveal details, suspense could be about the plot, suspense could be about many other things. And suspense is such a essential literary device because it creates the space for the reader to engage with the text. The moment there is suspense, there is a space for your imagination, for the imagination of the reader, so that the reader can fill in the details of her or his imagination. You know, the details from their lives come in and fill. Just to give a very simple example is, suppose if you are describing a long winding lane. It is really the writing skill where you don't reveal everything, reveal enough so that it gives space for your imagination. So the suspense is, again, to come back to your question, is kind of a literary device which almost every literary work uses in different degrees. And I have used it in a certain way in this particular book because of certain themes that are used in this book, and also certain kind of situations that arise. And it always requires, I thought that, and I hope that it gave enough space for the reader to create their own solutions.
I want to say something here as a reader of Vivek's books, which is that he makes extremely complex use of time. Should I use another microphone? Is this okay? No, it's not. Okay. Is this okay? Oh, okay. No, I want to say something as a reader about Vivek's books, which is that he makes extremely complex and sophisticated use of time. His narratives are not linear. So there's something that happens in the present, and then there's some character who has a flashback and things go somewhere. And the thing is, in those times when he's in the present, he imparts a certain momentum, often using suspense, which kind of can take you through sometimes a slightly, you know, there's almost a backward momentum to a flashback sometimes. And I think he gives it a sort of propulsive power with that element of suspense. You know, you have a sort of cliffhanger, what happened next, and then suddenly you're off dealing with all kinds of other issues that you never expected would enter. And I think that really works well for his books.
No, absolutely. I think Venkat particularly, who's the narrator in the book, he at times says something, wants to say something more, does not, wants to do something, but resists himself. So there is this economy of words and language and action actually also in the book. So in terms of translation, when you were translating the book from Kannada to English, did you also have to restrain yourself in terms of language to maintain the style?
You know, there is a lot of restraint, of course. And Vivek, I think when we had this book launch in Bangalore, there was a question from the audience where someone called Vivek stingy with words, which I thought was a perfect way to, I think, capture this restraint that Milee is talking about. In fact, later on, when we were discussing the book with our agent and so on, she had this. So at the core of the book is this family. There's a middle-aged man, Venkat, his wife, Vijay, and their roughly 20-year-old daughter, Rekha. And both Vijay and Venkat are like many people in Bangalore. They work in the technology industry. And whatever, they're living that aspirational sort of dream. There's a certain crisis that happens in their family for which they have to rush to their hometown. And they take the bus, and Shruti asked Vivek, look, if they're so prosperous, you know, the IT couple, why don't they have a car? And Vivek immediately took offense and said, what do you mean? They have 2 cars. I have just not mentioned it in the book. So,
so the reader definitely has to fill in the blanks at times and is on the ride together, pretty much. Well, I'd like all our audience here to get a taste of what we are talking about, the style, language, and the story a bit. So why don't you read something from the book, Vivek, in Kannada possibly, and then Srinath, you can read in English.
Sorry about that. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe you want to give some context. This is about a character called Ramana, who writes letters and to his sister, and his handwriting is illegible. So that is the context. Yeah. Let me read that in Kannada first, and then Srinath will read the English part. Srinath will read more than what I am reading. Not because I've written less, but many of you might have read this in Kannada because this book appeared in Kannada a year and a half ago, 2 years ago almost. Yeah. ಊರು ಬಿಟ್ಟೊಡನೆ ರಮಣನ ಸಂಪರ್ಕ ಸಂಪೂರ್ಣ ಕಡಿದು ಹೋಗುತ್ತಿತ್ತು. 2 ತಿಂಗಳಿಗೊಮ್ಮೆ ಅವನ ಕಾಗದ ಬಂದಾಗಲೇ ಅವನ ವಿಷಯ ಅಲ್ಪ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ತಿಳಿಯುವುದು. ಅವನ ಕೈ ಬರಹವೆಂದರೆ ಬ್ರಹ್ಮಲಿಪಿ, ಕಾಗದದ ಮೇಲೆ ಕಾಗೆ ಕಾಲು ಗುಬ್ಬಿ ಕಾಲು ಇಟ್ಟ ಹಾಗೆ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಅವನಿಗೆ ಅದೇ ಹೆಸರು ನಿಂತು ಹೋಯಿತು. ಅವನ ಮಾಸ್ತರುಗಳೆಲ್ಲ ಇಂತಹ ಕೈಬರಹವಿದ್ದು ಅವನು ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಪರೀಕ್ಷೆಗಳನ್ನು ಹೇಗೆ ಪಾಸಾದನೆಂದು ಆಶ್ಚರ್ಯಪಡುವರು. ಒಬ್ಬರಂತೂ ಅವನಿಗೆ ಎಡಗೈಯಲ್ಲಿ ಬರೆಯುವಂತೆ ಸಲಹೆ ಕೊಟ್ಟು ಅದರಿಂದ ಬರೆಯುವ ವೇಗ ಕಡಿಮೆಯಾಗಿ ಅಕ್ಷರಗಳು ಸ್ಫುಟವಾಗಿರುತ್ತವೆಂದು ಹೇಳಿದ್ದರು. ಶಾಲೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಪರೀಕ್ಷೆಯ ಹೆದರಿಕೆಯಿಂದ ಅಂಕೆಯಲ್ಲಿರುತ್ತಿದ್ದ ಅವನ ಕೈಬರಹು ಮುಂದೆ ಅವನು ಅದೆಲ್ಲದರಿಂದ ಸ್ವತಂತ್ರನಾದಂತೆ ಪೂರ್ತಿ ಹಳ್ಳ ಹತ್ತಿತು. ಅವನ ಹಾಗೆ ಅಸ್ತವ್ಯಸ್ತವಾಗಿ ಎರ್ರಾಬಿರಿಯಾಗಿ ಬರೆಯಲು ವಿಶೇಷವಾದ ಶಕ್ತಿಯೇ ಬೇಕು. ಸಾಮಾನ್ಯದವರಿಗೆ ಇಷ್ಟೊಂದು ನಿರ್ಲಕ್ಷ್ಯದಿಂದ ಬರೆಯುವುದು ಸಾಧ್ಯವಿಲ್ಲ. ಅಂತಹದೊಂದು ಕ್ಷೋಭೆಯು ಆಂತರ್ಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಬೇರು ಬಿಟ್ಟಾಗಲೇ ಅದು ಆಗುವುದು. ಜೊತೆಗೆ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆಯ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಅವನಿಗಿದ್ದಂತಹ ಅಸಡ್ಡೆಯೂ ಇರಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತದೋ ಏನೋ. ಪತ್ರದ ಲಕೋಟೆಯ ಮೇಲೆ ಅಮ್ಮನ ಹೆಸರಿರುತ್ತಿತ್ತು. ಇದು ಅಪ್ಪನಿಗೂ ಅಂತಣ್ಣನಿಗೂ ಕಿರಿಕಿರಿಯುಂಟು ಮಾಡುತ್ತಿತ್ತು. ಸುಂದರಿ ಅಂತ ಬರೆದರೆ ಯಾವನಿಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗುತ್ತದೆ ಎಂದವರು ಗೊಣಗುತ್ತಿದ್ದರೂ ಪತ್ರಗಳು ಸರಿಯಾಗಿ ಮನೆಗೆ ತಲುಪುತ್ತಿದ್ದವು. ಪ್ರೀತಿಯ ಅಕ್ಕನಿಗೆ ಎಂದು ಪತ್ರ ಶುರುವಾಗುತ್ತಿತ್ತು, ಅಥವಾ ಹಾಗೆಂದು ನಂಬಿದ್ದೆವು. ಕಾರಣ ಇಡೀ ಪತ್ರದಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದೇ ಒಂದು ಶಬ್ದವನ್ನು ನೇರವಾಗಿ ಓದಲು ಬರುವಂತಿರಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಗಂಟು ಗಂಟಾಗಿ, ತಿರುವು ಮುರುವಾಗಿ, ಸುಳಿದು ನುಗ್ಗಿ ಉಕ್ಕಿ ಹರಿದು ಸಿಡುಕಿ ಓರೆಕೋರೆಯಾಗಿ ಹೊರಳಿ ಅರ್ಥವಾಗದ ಚಿತ್ರಗಳ ಸರಣಿಯಂತಿರುವ ಕಾಗದದ ಮೇಲಿನ ಲಿಪಿ ಯಾವುದೆಂದು ಕೂಡ ಹೇಳಲು ಬರುವಂತಿರಲಿಲ್ಲ. ತನ್ನ ಈ ಪ್ರತಿಭೆ ಸ್ವತಃ ರಮಣನಿಗೂ ಗೊತ್ತಿದ್ದರಿಂದ ಅವನು ವಿಳಾಸವನ್ನು ಬೇರೆ ಯಾರಿಂದಲಾದರೂ ಬರೆಸುತ್ತಿದ್ದನು. 2 ಕಡ್ಡಿಗಳಿರುವ ಟಿ ಮತ್ತು 0 ಆಕಾರದ ಓ ಅಕ್ಷರಗಳನ್ನು ಕೆಡಿಸಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯವಿಲ್ಲವೆಂದು ನಂಬುವವರು ಅವನು ಇವುಗಳನ್ನು ಧ್ವಂಸ ಮಾಡಿದ ರೀತಿಯನ್ನು ನೋಡಬೇಕು. ಕೆಲವೊಮ್ಮೆ ಟಿ ಅಕ್ಷರದ ಅಡ್ಡಗೆರೆಯ ಮೇಲೆ ನೇಣಿನ ಉರುಳಿನಂತೆ ಓ ಅಕ್ಷರ ತೂಗಾಡುತ್ತಿತ್ತು. ಕೆಲವೊಮ್ಮೆ ಅದು ಲಂಬಗೆರೆಯ ತಳವನ್ನು ಅಪ್ಪಿಕೊಂಡಿರುತ್ತಿತ್ತು. ಒಮ್ಮೊಮ್ಮೆ ನಡುವನ್ನಪ್ಪಿಕೊಂಡು ಟಿ ಅಕ್ಷರಕ್ಕೆ ಹೊಟ್ಟೆ ಬಂದಂತೆ ಕಾಣಿಸುತ್ತಿತ್ತು. ಒಳಗಡೆ ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಬರೆಯುತ್ತಿದ್ದ ಅವನ ವಿಳಾಸವಂತೂ ಅಂಕೆಯಿಲ್ಲದೆ ಹರಡಿದ ಮುಳ್ಳುಗಾಡಿನ ಹಾಗಿರುತ್ತಿತ್ತು.
We had almost no contact with Ramana after he left the village. The only news we received of him was from the letters he wrote every couple of months. And these were almost impossible to read because of his handwriting. His Kannada looked like some ancient, undeciphered script, as inscrutable as the writing of fate itself. More than one of Ramana's teachers at school had looked at his notebook and wondered if crows and sparrows had walked all over the page, leaving footprints. And they were astounded when he passed the board exams. One of them had gone so far as to advise him to write with his left hand, hoping it would force him to write slowly and therefore more clearly. As long as he was in school, the prospect of examinations kept his handwriting somewhat tolerable. Afterwards, it went completely to ruin. It takes a special talent to write so recklessly. Maybe it needs to originate in a corresponding chaos deep within a person. And maybe it also requires the kind of contempt for the system that Ramana had. His letters had Amma's name on the envelope. This annoyed both Appa and Antanna. How will anyone know who Sundari is? They would grumble. But this never seemed to get in the way of the letter being delivered. The letters began, "To my dear sister," or so we believed. Because we could not be certain about a single word in his letters. It wasn't even clear what script these knotted, twisted, winding, slithering, overwritten, crooked, jagged marks on the paper represented. Ramana was aware of this talent of his. And so he had someone else write the address. But he wrote the "to" above the address himself in English. Those who think it is impossible to go wrong while writing alphabets involving no more than 2 short lines and a small circle should see the way he destroyed them. The O sometimes hung above the T like a noose, or it was scrawled below the vertical line of the T. Sometimes the 2 letters were next to each other, but too close, making it appear as if the T had grown a potbelly. His address, written within the letter, would again be in English, looking like a tangle of thorny bushes. Appa would shout Ramana's letter as soon as he received it from the postman. On several occasions, I sat on the veranda in front of the house with Appa and tried to read the letter as soon as it arrived. Appa's patience would run out in a few minutes. He would give up, saying, let him go to hell. Who knows what he writes? Go keep it on the table. The next phase involved leaving the letter on the table below the wall clock in the hall. A rock served as a paperweight, and beside it was kept a fountain pen with red ink. We all looked at the letter while passing by it in the course of the day, or sat with it when we had a few minutes to spare. If you looked at it long enough and tried hard enough, the seemingly random marks on paper sometimes resolved into likely words. Whenever one of us thought we had deciphered a word, we would write it down between the lines in tiny letters. This process sometimes resulted in sentences that made no sense. Shortage of funds is the foundation of beloved superstition, flower garland. At times, these sentences lacked verbs and left us with no clue as to what they were trying to say. Sometimes we used already decoded... Closer?
Loud.
Sometimes we used already decoded fragments to guess what word might come next and try to see it in Ramana's writing. In the process, it was easy to lose track of meaning. A sentence arrived at after a long struggle might make no sense in relation to the rest of the letter. Such sentences would then have to be reassembled. So though a sentence like, I have lost my heart to the old women of Kerala, was one that could plausibly occur in a letter from Ramana, we knew we had gone wrong when the next sentence read, and so the bank people have started to make trouble. Or a sentence like, it gives me great pleasure to tell you that my wife has been ill for the last week, was unlikely all by itself, more so because Ramana did not have a wife. Amma would remember the words she had identified, run them past me saying, see if this fits, and then have me write them out. I don't recall her ever writing anything on her own. I can still see her standing there, peering at the letter and guessing at its contents as if it would take her closer to her brother, who could be anywhere. It took a couple of weeks for this process to yield something that could actually be read. This journey from strange squiggles and marks to script, from the letters of a script to words, from words to intelligible sentences, and finally, from sentences to meaning, felt like a speeded-up demonstration of how language evolved in human civilization. Amma would have me write out a reply a day or two after we had managed to make sense of a letter. I would then put Ramana's letter on top of the other letters on the wire and hang it from its nail on the wall. Ramana himself had trouble reading his handwriting. On one of his visits to the village, Antanna thrust an old letter into his hands, pointed to a line and said, what have you written here? I can't make any sense of it. The letter, full of red ink, looked like a battlefield. Ramana squinted at the line for 5 minutes and then said, oh, now that I'm here, there's no need to read this anymore.
The book begins with Venkat, the father, realizing that his daughter, Rekha, is missing. And he tries to take control of the situation, as through the book we see he also tries to control her, but he seems almost helpless. So what is really missing in this seemingly normal family?
See, disappearance is something, again, another narrative device which has been used by many, and so as by me in this book. Because that creates, it's a very good way of assessing relationships and many other things in the world. Because it does not have the finality of death. So someone is missing, you always hope and assume that the person will come back, or you will find the person. At the same time, it is an opportunity for you to assess the relationships and how you really want to look at it. And I feel that is something that has been used in the novel all through, which has given me an opportunity to explore these relationships and examine those things.
Well, with the mother, however, Rekha has a different kind of a relationship. It seems that they have an unspoken understanding. They keep secrets, or so it seems. So how is it different from the father? Because normally we say daughters are closer to the father, but in this case, in this story, we see something different.
I really don't know, because it is, what you say is right in some sense, but in the circumstances where this family is, I think the camaraderie is because both of them are women. And the situation in which they are, how the father treats his wife and his daughter, that's probably the reason. I mean, it's very difficult for me to really answer this question. However, I have seen in many families that it is, when there is trouble, it is daughters who are more closer to mothers than anyone else in the family. Because I guess they, and also because of the plot. I mean, I don't want to generalize this, but the plot and the story is in such a way that they probably don't have another way to deal with this.
There is, of course, this underlying patriarchy, that we see through the novel and the story, and probably, one of the reasons, like you said, that the mother and daughter, they come together to each other. As a writer, how easy is it to, or how difficult it is to write about women?
It's very difficult. For one, recently someone asked me a question, why haven't I written this novel from the perspective of a woman? Why is this narrator a male and why not a woman? I think it is impossible for me to write from that perspective, because it is not possible for me, at least, to see the world from women's point of view. It is because they look at it in completely different way. It will only be my arrogance and again, some kind of a patriarchy to even assume that I can understand it. Yeah? What you really see in this book is the response of the narrator to a situation, and the response of women as they are another human being. And I think because in our society we even lack this, you get an impression that the writer has really understood woman's world. I feel I'm really at the very top and not been able to really get to the bottom of this. And as I said, the worldview and the way women look at the world is completely different. And I don't even want to go anywhere near there and claim that I can understand it. Yeah. Yeah.
I see a lot of women clapping. There are also different journeys in the book. And like you said, Srinath, there's time that Vivek plays with in terms of the plot and the story. The past meets the present. And we see Venkat's journey from the village to the city. And when the daughter Rekha is missing, they go back to the village to try and find her. How are these journeys important in the book?
So I think in a lot of Vivek's books, there is this kind of tension that exists between the village and the city. And in the last one, Ghachar Gochar, it was set mostly in the city, mostly indoors. But there is the specter of the village always hanging above these books. And I think in this one, it is made a little more explicit because he goes deeper into what kind of, where. So the book is, there are these people living in Bangalore, this family. And there is this narrator, Venkat, who has, who thinks he is liberal. There's even a point in the book where he says that if I had known the word liberal back then, I would have called myself one. But the truth is that there is some very fundamental impulse in him which, almost without his ability to intervene, has him be dominant when he is dealing with his wife and daughter. And I think going from the city to the village kind of traces the roots of this kind of, what are the seeds of this attitude and where do they come from? So there is a plot point in the village which I don't want to give away about some land and so on. And the patterns of inheritance we have developed, the relationships between members of the family and so on, which I think again forms a circle of sorts. It is a manifestation of patriarchy, and it promotes it as well. It continues its prevalence. And I think a lot of what happens in the city parts are understandable because of what happens in the village, previous generations and so on. So I think they play a really significant role. And also a journey is a very important way to, because what happens when you travel is that the backdrop changes. So you suddenly find yourself in a different world, relating to each other and your surroundings in different ways. And so we see that happening between Venkat and his wife. They take a bus journey together, and there is a slightly fraught situation in which they have to deal with several other people. So you see a lot of things that may not come up in the regular pattern of relationships get excavated. So I think these are very significant parts of the book. And it's really nice to go out in the open once you have that, after the claustrophobic indoors also. So Vivek, what do you think?
Would you like to add?
No, I think Srinath has covered everything. But that time lapse is something I'm interested in as a writer, because the journey, as Srinath said, is so important, because otherwise, even to change the setting, it makes a lot of difference when you do it through a journey, rather than you start a paragraph saying they are in the village. Yeah, so those journeys for me are very, very important in terms of time, in terms of background, in terms of how the mood changes, so that it is so much easier to deal with it when they actually are there in a particular place. And the location, I guess it is important for every writer, and as for me also it is most important, because it is something, when it gels well with the situation and with the certain, in that context, it works like magic. And you don't even notice that it is adding to the narrative. And to prepare for that kind of a backdrop and that location, one has to prepare the reader to be there, instead of transporting in one sentence. So I always like these journeys in my stories or novels, instead of cutting and bringing a reader into a different environment.
And also something I like about journeys in general, and also I think you see some of that when Vivek writes about it, is that you're not in any place at that time. So it's like purifying time and just inhabiting it. So which is a lovely space for, I think, a fiction writer to explore. Yeah.
And remember, Srinath is a travel writer.